Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live took an unexpected turn when legendary actor Harrison Ford walked off set after a tense confrontation with host Jimmy Kimmel over Hollywood politics. In cancel culture, the studio felt different from the moment Ford stepped onto the stage. The 81-year-old icon, known for his roles as Han Solo and Indiana Jones, carried his usual stoic presence, but there was a flicker in his eyes suggesting this would be no ordinary promotional appearance. Kimmel, flashing his trademark grin, welcomed him to thunderous applause. Harrison Ford. Everybody, the man, the myth, the legend, he announced, his enthusiasm radiating through the studio. Ford settled into the guest chair with understated calm, nodding politely to the audience before turning his attention to Kimmel. The initial pleasantries flowed smoothly, a discussion of Ford's latest project, humorous anecdotes about working with directors, and the customary tales of on-set injuries that had become part of his public persona. But as the interview progressed, Kimmel steered the conversation into more dangerous territory. "You've been in this business for over 5 decades, Harrison," Kimmel began, leaning back in his chair with a calculated smile. "You've seen Hollywood change dramatically. What do you think about how the industry handles controversial figures these days?" Ford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What do you mean by that, Jimmy?" "Well, we've seen actors face consequences for things they've said or done," Kimmel said. "Some call it accountability, others call it cancel culture. You've always been outspoken about your political views. Do you ever worry about saying the wrong thing?" The question hung in the air. Ford gripped the arms of his chair a little tighter. People should be able to express their opinions without fearing their careers will be destroyed by a mob mentality. He replied evenly. Kimmel's eyebrows rose, sensing an opening. "So, you think some people who faced consequences didn't deserve it?" "I'm talking about principle," Ford said, his voice steady but tense. "There's a difference between holding someone accountable for real wrongdoing and destroying someone's livelihood for expressing an unpopular opinion or making a mistake years ago." The audience grew noticeably quiet, some shifting uneasily. The playful tone of the show had vanished. Kimmel pressed further. "But don't people in positions of influence, like actors, have a responsibility to be careful about what they say, especially on sensitive topics?" Ford's eyes narrowed. "Careful, according to whom? You, the Twitter mob, some corporate boardroom." His voice was calm, but the steel behind it was clear. "I've been in this business since before you were born, Jimmy. I've seen trends come and go and watched good people destroyed by hysteria. I wouldn't call holding people accountable for hate speech hysteria," Kimmel interjected, his tone sharpening. "When someone uses their platform to spread harmful ideologies or discriminatory comments, shouldn't there be consequences?" The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera operators continued filming, but crew members exchanged worried glances. Producers in the control room likely debated whether to cut to commercial. Ford leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "And who decides what counts as hate speech? You, network executives, some algorithm in Silicon Valley, or maybe talk show hosts who think they're arbiters of moral authority?" The comment landed hard. Kimmel's practiced smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a harder edge. "I think most reasonable people can recognize hate speech when they see it," Kimmel said. "Harrison, we're not talking philosophy here, just basic human decency." Ford's voice took on a measured, almost disbelieving tone. "Basic human decency. That's convenient, isn't it? Broad enough to mean whatever you want it to mean." The audience fell silent. This was no ordinary interview banter. It was raw, real, and unfolding live on national television. Sensing he might be losing control, Kimmel tried to regain footing. "Look, I think we can all agree that racism, sexism, and bigotry are wrong. Public figures promoting those things should face consequences. That's not controversial. That's just there you go again." Ford cut in, his voice slicing through Kimmel's words like a knife. "Defining the debate on your terms to fit your narrative." Kimmel's face flushed, his composure beginning to crack. "I'm not defining anything, Harrison. I'm just pointing out there are consequences for harmful behavior. That's how society works." "Society," Ford repeated dryly. "Humorless, or is that just how your little corner of Hollywood works?" "Last I checked, society includes people who don't live in Malibu mansions. People who don't get their worldview dictated by entertainment industry group Tink." The remark hit a nerve. Kimmel's practiced smile vanished, replaced by tight, barely contained irritation. "That's rich, coming from someone who's made millions playing characters who gun down bad guys without consequence. Maybe you're just upset because the real world has more nuance than your movies." Ford's eyes flashed dangerously. "Don't lecture me about nuance, Jimmy, and don't pretend what you do here is anything more than performance art designed to make your audience feel superior to strangers they've never met." "Performance art." Kimmel's voice rose, the careful host persona slipping. "I'm trying to have honest conversations about real issues. Maybe that makes you uncomfortable because you've spent so long hiding behind fictional characters." The studio crackled with tension, charged with an electric intensity that had everyone on edge. Camera operators instinctively zoomed in, sensing they were capturing something historic. Audience members pulled out phones, though security would later confiscate the footage. Ford rose slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow over Kimmel's desk. Hiding behind characters, that's what you think I do. His voice carried the gravitas of decades, the intensity that had made him one of cinema's most compelling leads. Let me tell you something about hiding, Jimmy. At least when I play a character, I'm honest about it. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. Kimmel leaned forward aggressively. What's that supposed to mean? It means you sit behind that desk every night pretending to be some kind of moral authority, Ford said, voice cutting through the studio silence like glass, when really, you're just another entertainer, desperate for applause. You take complex issues and reduce them to punchlines and applause breaks. You create divisions where there could be understanding. I create divisions. Kimmel's voice cracked, composure finally slipping. I'm not defending people who spread hate and discrimination. I'm not excusing bigotry. Ford's hands clenched at his sides. There you go again. Anyone who disagrees with your worldview is automatically a bigot. Anyone who questions your methods is defending hate. It's a neat trick, isn't it? Shut down debate by painting your opponents as monsters. The audience was frozen, caught between fascination and discomfort. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was raw confrontation to men embodying clashing philosophies about art, society, and responsibility. Kimmel stood, attempting to match Ford's imposing presence. Maybe some people deserve to be painted as monsters. Harrison, maybe when someone promotes ideas that hurt people, that dehumanize entire groups, they forfeit the right to polite disagreement. And who made you judge and jury? Ford shot back, stepping closer. When did talk show hosts become arbiters of acceptable thought? When did comedians start deciding who gets to work and who gets blacklisted? We're not blacklisting anyone, Kimmel protested, voice lacking conviction. We're just choosing not to platform hate. Ford laughed, sharp and bitter. Not platforming hate, you call it. What you really mean is not platforming anyone who doesn't agree with your political orthodoxy. Anyone who questions the narrative. Anyone who thinks for themselves. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch. Both men stood, facing each other across the desk like adversaries in an old Western showdown. Studio lights cast harsh shadows, making the scene almost cinematic. Kimmel's face was red, his carefully cultivated media training abandoned. You know what, Harrison? Maybe the problem isn't cancel culture, Kimmel said. Maybe the problem is people like you can't handle a world where words have consequences. Where you can't just say whatever you want without pushback. Ford's eyes narrowed to slits. Consequences, he repeated, voice low and dangerous. Funny how consequences only seem to flow in one direction, isn't it? Funny how they only apply to people who step out of line from your approved thinking. My approved thinking. Kimmel's voice nearly shrilled. I'm talking about basic human rights, basic decency. If you can't understand that, don't dare lecture me about human rights, Ford growled. I've lived through more history than you've read about in your Twitter feed. I've seen real oppression, real injustice, real consequences for speaking truth to power. What you're doing isn't fighting for human rights, Ford said, his voice low, cutting. It's performative activism designed to make you feel important. The words hit Kimmel like a slap. His face flushed from red to almost purple, veins standing out at his temples. Performative activism, Kimmel shot back. I use my platform to call out hatred and discrimination. I give voice to the voiceless. That's more than hiding behind movie roles and staying silent when it matters. Staying silent, Ford's voice thundered across the studio, making several audience members flinch. I've been fighting battles before you even knew what a television camera was. The studio fell utterly silent. Only the hum of equipment and the faint whispers of panicked producers in the control booth remained. Security moved closer, unsure if they were witnessing an interview gone wrong or something more dangerous. Please, Kimmel sneered, sensing he needed to push harder. Spare me the war stories, Harrison. You think because you flew planes and did your own stunts that makes you some kind of authority on moral courage. You're just another privileged Hollywood elite, upset the world doesn't bow to you anymore. Ford froze, his intensity sharpening into a laser focus. When he spoke, it was quiet, deliberate, and menacing. Privileged Hollywood elite, he repeated, savoring the words. That's what you think I am. That's your way of dismissing anyone who challenges your worldview. Just label them privileged and elite. Suddenly, their opinions don't matter. Kimmel, sensing an opening, pressed harder. If the shoe fits, Harrison, you've made hundreds of millions pretending to be heroes, while real heroes face the consequences of hate speech and discrimination. Maybe it's time you acknowledged your privilege instead of defending it. Ford's hands trembled not with fear, but with rage. You want to talk about privilege? Let's talk about your privilege sitting behind that desk every night. Passing judgment on people you've never met, destroying careers with snarky comments and carefully edited segments. Let's talk about the privilege of never facing real consequences because you're always on the approved side of every issue. I face consequences every day. I get death threats from your people. Kimmel shot back, voice cracking. boycotts, harassment campaigns. Don't pretend that speaking out against hate doesn't come at a price, my people. Ford's incredulity cut through the room. There it is. The real Jimmy Kimmel. Everyone who disagrees with you is some monolithic enemy force you're bravely fighting. You can't imagine that decent people might just think differently than you. The studio felt like a powder keg. Two alpha personalities locked in intellectual combat. Decades of frustration fueling the fire. Different perspectives, Kimmel shrieked. Is that what we're calling racism now? Sexism, homophobia, just different ways of looking at the world. Ford stepped closer, closing the distance, the air between them crackling. You use those words like talismans, Jimmy, magic spells that automatically win arguments. But I'm not afraid of your labels. I'm not afraid of your Twitter mob or your cancel campaigns. Maybe you should be, Kimmel said, lowering his voice to match Ford's intensity. Maybe people who defend hate should face consequences. Maybe the days of hiding behind fame and fortune are over. Ford's eyes blazed, legendary intensity radiating from him. Is that a threat, Jimmy? Threatening me on national television? I'm just saying, actions have consequences. Words have consequences. Maybe it's time you learned that. Ford laughed cold, humorless. Consequences from you, a man whose most dangerous act is telling jokes to a studio audience. You have no idea what real consequences look like. The studio held its breath. Cameras rolled, capturing every heartbeat, every glare. Everyone knew they were witnessing something that could either vanish into history or become one of the most infamous television moments ever. Kimmel, sensing his control slipping entirely, made one last move. You know what, Harrison? I think our audience deserves to know what kind of person you really are. What values you actually stand for. Ford's smile was predatory, cold. By all means, Jimmy, tell them what kind of person I am. Kimmel hesitated, staring into Ford's unflinching gaze, ego refusing to retreat. Fine, I think you're someone so insulated by wealth and fame that you've lost touch with reality. Ford said, his voice steady, cutting through the studio like a blade. Someone who defends bigotry because it doesn't affect you personally. You represent everything that's wrong with old Hollywood. The words echoed like gunshots. Ford stood motionless for a moment, letting them land, his presence commanding the room. Then he spoke. Calm, but charged with authority honed over 5 decades. Old Hollywood, he repeated deliberately. You mean the Hollywood that created art instead of propaganda? The Hollywood that told stories instead of sermons? The Hollywood that respected its audience instead of lecturing them? Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Ford wasn't done. Let me tell you about old Hollywood, Jimmy. It gave people like you the platform you now use to destroy it. It created the industry that made you rich and famous. And it understood something you've forgotten. Entertaining people is a privilege, not a right to indoctrinate them. The studio audience was silent, mesmerized by the controlled intensity of the actor before them. Ford's voice never rose, yet every word carried the weight of conviction. You want to know what kind of person I am? He continued, stepping forward until he stood directly in front of Kimmel's desk. I'm someone who spent a career earning the audience's trust. Someone who's risked his life dozens of times to give people authentic entertainment. Someone who believes in treating others with dignity, even when they disagree with me. Kimmel tried to interrupt. Harrison, I'm not finished. Ford cut him off with surgical precision. You asked what kind of person I am, so I'm telling you, I don't need to destroy others to feel important. I can disagree without labeling someone evil. I know real strength comes from building people up, not tearing them down. The words landed like blows. Kimmel's face drained of color. His earlier bravado evaporated. He glanced around the studio desperately, as if looking for rescue that wasn't coming. Ford's voice dropped to a whisper, yet it carried to the back row. And you want to know the real difference between us, Jimmy? When I finish this conversation, I'll go home and sleep peacefully, knowing I've lived with integrity. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a sword. Kimmel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. His carefully crafted persona lay in ruins. I thought not, Ford said quietly, straightening his jacket with deliberate, measured dignity. I came here tonight to promote a movie. Instead, I've glimpsed the soul of modern entertainment and, frankly, I don't like what I see. Turning to the audience, his voice rang clear to the back rows. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. You came for entertainment, not a lecture on why discourse in this country has become so toxic. The blame lies with those who confuse celebrity with wisdom. The audience remained rapt, silent, aware they were witnessing something real. Not scripted, not rehearsed, authentic human drama. Ford turned back to Kimmel one final time. Jimmy, I hope someday you understand the difference between holding people accountable and destroying them. Real courage isn't punching down at those who can't fight back. It's having the strength to admit when you're wrong. With that, Ford strode toward the exit. His footsteps echoed through the stunned studio. Kimmel called out desperately, Harrison, wait, we can work this out. Ford paused at the edge of the stage, glancing back with quiet disappointment. No, Jimmy, we can't. Working it out would require you to listen and, you've forgotten how. He disappeared into the wings, leaving a studio frozen in disbelief. Kimmel remained behind his desk, mouth opening and closing silently, processing the encounter. The audience buzzed, then erupted with discussion. They had just witnessed one of Hollywood's most respected figures deliver a masterclass in dignity under fire, while a talk show host's credibility crumbled in real time. Security moved cautiously, but the damage was done. Within minutes, footage would leak, despite attempts to suppress it. Within hours, the confrontation would trend worldwide. Within days, Kimmel's ratings would dip as viewers rejected what many saw as mean-spirited activism, masquerading as entertainment. The moment became a watershed in national conversation about the responsibility of entertainers, the difference between accountability and destruction, and the power of integrity. For Harrison Ford, it was a definitive statement on the values guiding his extraordinary career. For Jimmy Kimmel, a brutal lesson in the difference between wielding power and earning respect. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out, one truth was unmistakable: they had just witnessed television history and not the kind Hollywood would celebrate.